All right. Hello, everybody. How are you? First off, I wanted to know who knows about this project already. Okay. Okay, I'm not going to ask the next question. So I will do a small introduction because apparently half of the people there don't know about it. First, well, basically what I think I have like 30 minutes or so to talk about this. So what I'll do is just introduce myself, talk about how this project came to be. And by the way, I'm French Canadian, so there's an accent there, so don't worry. What happened, because now I've designed the revision B of the board. I've done a lot of changes, so I'm going to update about what's the difference between revision A and B. And ultimately, I'll talk more about what's going to happen next and what's the target and what's the purpose of all this project, right? So basically, I am a electronic hardware design engineer. I've been doing that for a long, long time. I had many companies. I started companies designing products, but I was not very good doing business. So I kind of went back to work for others. And now I'm working for this company in Vancouver, which is called Cron Technology, and we do fast frame rate cameras. But on the side, I was looking for, so back in April of this year, I was looking for to start a new project, and David Murray, I don't know if most of you know the Hitbit guy on YouTube, did this episode on this homemade computer called the Gigatron. And at the end of the video, he said, "Oh, I wish somebody would build me my dream computers," which led to him creating a list of stuff that he wanted and on his website. And I looked at the wish list and I said, "Oh, you know what? It'd be cool to create this project." And I started creating a version or my vision of what he would want to have. So basically, he was looking for something that was close to be like a 64 without being a 64, a faster version of a 64, but with more capabilities. Because I think in his mind he wanted to be able to actually run BASIC, but the BASIC would be so fast that you could actually do games and stuff like that. That was his wish list, or that was his wishes at the beginning of the project. So on my end, when I saw the list, I saw something more towards something that would fit in between the C128 and the Amiga. And that's basically the idea I went on at the beginning. I said, okay, designing a computer to design a computer, it's for me as a designer who's been doing that for many, many years, it's pretty easy. So I have to create myself some kind of, I had to figure out a way to make it more interesting. So I said, okay, let's design a computer that would be like a new retro type computer, but with certain restriction, like if it was designed back in 1984. So I went on with the idea that, okay, let's create a computer, a retro computer that if, for example, if the Commodore president, what's his name again? Jack Jamel didn't move to Atari and just went on and keep designing new product. And that's basically how the things happened. And it just happened to be accidental to a certain degree, but I thought it made perfect sense to me. So in the meantime, that was in April and May of this year, I was thinking about how I would go about doing it and everything and set the rules. And at the same time, I was like, I started doing the schematic for the product, and then I had to get these parts or these symbols, schematic symbols of this website called SnappyDA, which is a free providers of symbols for schematic. And then all of a sudden I end up being the 100,000 subscribers. And the CEO of the company said, "Hey, do you want to do an interview about the project you're working on?" And that's that's Natasha, and she was really nice. She said, "Okay, let's do an interview about the project," but she didn't know what kind of project I was working on. And then we did the interview, and then from that moment, I got a lot of attention for it, which led me to meet Leaf, and then I did the presentation in Toronto in June, right?
Sounds right.
Please. So, So early on, the idea was, okay, David's specification was, okay, let's use a 65-816, which is a pseudo 16-bit version of the 6502, and they still sell today. And the specified speed is 14 megahertz, but apparently we can actually overclock them. And this is, so for me, it made sense, you know, same kind of CPUs, but a little bit faster. And you wanted to have better graphics, better sound, but still, in my restriction list, for me, it was important not to design stuff that was used today, okay? Like, for example, you probably all know the Amiga 65. Basically, Amiga 65 is supposed to be a replica of the Commodore C65 that never came out or barely came out. And basically just use a big FPGA and just put it in the middle and just integrate all the logic in one single chip. This is very typical of today's design, to just integrate everything. For me, I said, okay, I don't want to do that. Doesn't make any sense. I said, okay, I'm going to use FPGAs, but they're going to be smaller. And by the way, do everybody know what an FPGA is? Yeah. Yes, awesome, thank you. I just want to make sure that I don't confuse anybody with this. So the idea was, okay, let's use smaller FPGA. And with FPGAs, usually they're RAM-based, so usually you have an EEPROM on the side to flash the FPGA when it boots. But I found a model, an Intel FPGA that actually has flash inside, so you don't have an external device externally. So they would behave like ASICs. And again, that was part of the whole idea, to actually design something with the idea that the chipset would be like if they would have been designed by the MOS team back then. So simply just a chip in the middle, just doing the work. So at that point, I just separated all the work in 3 different FPGAs, one for graphics, one for sound and IOs, and one for the CPU or system control. So to come back on the timeline, so we're back in May. I'm still in Toronto at that point, but I get interviewed to actually move to Vancouver, and at that point I already started doing the design. But in the meantime, I get contacted by Jim. Jim was at the show supposedly. What's his last name? Jim Drew.
Oh, yeah, he couldn't make it unfortunately.
He could not make it? Oh, that's sad. So Jim Drew, who probably some of you know, he's been very active in the community for a long time. So he invites me to CRX in Vegas in August. So at that point, we agreed that, okay, it'd be great if we could show something. So I really go and I try to design something really fast. And I at that point, I came up with the revision A of the board that we're going to see here. So this is the first version of the board. Let me put the cover on it. So that was the early, hold on. Okay, so this is the original design or vision I had about it. So you had the connectors, the connectors on the side. You had this, the IOs on the back. I will come back to that later. Actually, you know, the enclosures has been signed by David Murray himself, which is kind of cool. Anyway, so at that point, by end of July, early August, I get a board, I build a board, I start working on the board, trying to get something to work, or a little bit something to work on at CRX in August. I never reached that point. I did make some changes, I did make some development, I got some stuff to work, but not enough to actually show something. So after that, I worked on it for a while, but I had like a major problem with the boards, and I migrated towards a new version of the board that I just finished, and I just populated, and I just started working, which this version works very well. So, so in the past, I don't know, I knew the C256 Foenix was going to be something different than, I mean, I want to make it have the same feel as a Commodore computer, because the vision was, okay, it's supposed to be the C256, the following of the C128. So for a while, I was thinking, okay, do I want to make the same assumption that these guys did in the past, which is to have two processors, two different operating systems, depending on what kind of application we wanted to do. And it came to me, I said, no, I don't want to make the same mistake, because that was a mistake. I personally think it was a mistake to actually go into that direction, to have a Z80 and a C6502 and try to get two things done with the same machine. So I said the C256 Foenix should be its own thing. But at the same time, I was trying to please the purist in terms of trying to get something close to be a C64. And people were asking me at the beginning, will it be compatible with the C64? And early on, I was like, I'm not sure if I really want to go there, but what I will do is I will try to put as much on the board to actually make it as compatible to C64 as possible. So if somebody wants to do the work, then they could. And looking back, I think that was a mistake. And that's a lot of stuff that I changed from revision A to revision B, because the intention was really to create something new and to bring about enough feature for graphics and sound that would enable people to actually go back and sit down and create games. I mean, there's still people creating games with the C64 and the VIC-20 today. I'm sure if they have a new platform powerful enough, that could probably be super interesting for them to actually develop contents for it. So, just to give you an idea for the people who didn't know about it, early on, so just to go around the board, we had the main CPU here, and there was a chipset, one of the first FPGA, which was called Gavin, which is the system controller. We have the two CIAs that we used to have in the C64 that was controlling the two joystick port and the user port here. As well as I put a standard C64 connector for the keyboard in case people would want to create their own closure. I also, at that point, created this expansion port that was, a part of it was completely compatible with the C64, but the other part was not. There was the expansion of the fact that you had 24 bits address space. And after that, you would have the Viki, the graphic controller, that would be VGA and DVI, and then you would have Beatrix, which is the sound controller, which would drive two SIDs and two OPL2, which was the chip that was designed into the Sound Blaster card. And I think there would be an expansion port, and there would be this Super I/O chip where you would have a floppy controller and the MIDI ports and serial ports and parallel ports here for these connectors here in the front. So the Super I/O was also dealing with the PS2 keyboard and PS2 mouse. So that was the first version of the board. And like I mentioned before, I had a lot of issues with it, timing issues, balancing issues, because I laid out the FPGA not properly, and I paid dearly for it because I couldn't, noise issues can be a big problem because one will affect the other. So I never managed to do as much as I would have wanted to get the machine to a farther point into development. I wanted to be so much more advanced in the development right now than I'm actually currently is. So after I was done with that, I spoke to a lot of people, and along the way, obviously, a lot of people came back and gave their feedback about it, saying, okay, this is, I wish we would have this, I wish I would have that. And I took all these things in consideration, and I realized that the whole compatibility with C64 was not worth it, and it was very expensive because most of the user interface with the C64s are 5-volt signaling system, and the bulk of the system was 3 volts. So I had to put a lot more parts to translate these 3.3 volt system to a 5-volt system, which overall was increasing the whole cost of the whole unit. So to since I don't have a lot of time, I will move towards the revision B now. So the revision B is, as you can see, quite different. There's a lot of stuff that have changed. So you have to understand that at some point, the deal was because at that point on the other board I had 8 megabytes of memory on the board, plus another 1 meg of static RAM on the board as well. So it was a lot of memory. And the deal was that if I have a floppy that is 1.44 meg and I have 8 megs, that means I need a lot of floppies to actually download something. People don't have floppy drives anymore. And people were asking for the SD card, and I at the beginning I didn't want to do it, and then I ended up doing it. But if you think about it, then there's a lot of things that you don't need anymore. So the whole user report thing was not necessary. The expansion port was not necessary anymore. So everything that was C64 oriented got out literally. The FPG, in terms of sound, the SID, for example, was a big issue because I wanted to keep the SIDs, but the problem with the SIDs is that obviously this is the availability of the SID, right? How do you go about finding those SIDs that everybody wants for their own project, audio project? So I just said, you know what, that doesn't make any sense. If this thing would work and I would start, people would would want to have them, then what do I do about the SIDs, right? So there will be a SID, but it's going to be an FPGA SID, which will be a little bit modified or expanded upon to have more voices and volume control and stuff like that. But I won't be using any real part. So in this version of the board, I kept the 2OPL2. There will be, this is Beatrix, but so now Beatrix will have the SID inside, and there's a small DAC here for the SID. And I hope I'm on the right side. No, the other side, sorry. So this is a little DAC here for it. Something I realized also is that this machine, because of the MIDI port and everything, would be a powerhouse music machine. And to really realize the real potential of that computer, I kind of added, I wanted to have sampling the same way Amiga had sampling. And today's it's very difficult to find old parts, so I went on with something a little bit more recent, which I broke my own rules. I actually put a codec on the board, which allows you to actually line in. You will be able to actually do sampling, capturing sampling, and I play it back. So in terms of sound, you'll have the 2OPL2s, which is 9 voice in stereo, plus the SID, and plus some sampling, a 24-bit codec that you can get out of any phone or anything these days. So this is the audio section. You have the 2 MIDI ports on the top here. And if we keep going, so you have the SD card controller here, you have the SD card port, and you have the, on the top part here, you have Vicky, which is the graphic controller. Now I'm dealing with SRAM instead of DRAM, because DRAM ended up being a lot of work. So I tried to ease up my work a little bit. So you have 4 megs of the SRAM here, and you'll have 2 megs of code RAM outside here, if I can put my finger on it here. You have the 2 sockets where you'll have the boot, the BIOS or the kernel, and there will be an expansion for users if they want to expand it. Here you have an expansion that will come on the side. After talking to a lot of people, I put 4 joystick port in the front, and so you have a net phone in the front, and in the back you'll have the parallel port, the serial port, that are all compatible with PC register level and stuff like that. So it's really easy to interface, and PS2 in for the mouse and the keyboard. In terms of graphics, we're talking about 640 by 480 with a border, or 800 by 600 with no border. They will be programmable, that you can remove the top borders or the side borders, depending if people design games and they want to remove and keep some borders, they can. You'll have a tiling system. They'll have sprites, like a ton of sprites. And in reality, if you the computer people came back to me at some point and say, hey, why don't you name the computer with the number of RAM you have inside? But in reality, naming always went along with the fact that every pixel is only 1 byte, so 256 colors, and out of lookup tables. But you have different lookup tables for the bitmap, for example, or so. There will be a lot of graphic features, and it's going to be a lot of fun, sure. So right now, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. The camera, if you're okay with it. So I think you can. Whoops, sorry. I will disrupt the link. So I think you can see it here. Whoops, I'm going to move. So this is it. I don't know. Can you see clearly what's written on the board, on the monitor? Huh?
Almost. Oh, there we go.
Almost. You want me to get closer?
Whoa, there we go.
All right. So this is the output of the computer right now. All the problems I had on the revision A are gone. So moving forward from now on will be very, very, very easy and very fast. Well, not very easy, but it's going to be fast, which leads me to talk to you about what's going to happen in the next few months. So the idea was to create this computer for the community to design on it and to create this new bunch of games based on the new hardware. And in terms, if you want to, in terms of visioning it, where it stands in time, it's a computer that would be close to, actually will be more, because of the 14 megahertz processor, this is something that would be akin to a Apple IIgs or Super Nintendo, but somewhat faster. Okay, with a little bit more capability. I mean, this thing is, in terms of resolution and features, hardware features, would be surpassing an Apple IIgs, but it's still in the realm of it in terms of time frame where it would sit. All right. So it's really about creating a community of programmers first. So the goal right now, within the next month or so, is to create a development platform. Development platform will be this board plus a bunch of tools and everything that people need to develop new content with all the documentation and everything. So if there's any development people in the crowd, then you might be interested into that. And this is the first goal. The first goal is really to release a bunch of boards, which will be pre-sold probably early next year for people to start designing with it. I already have like a bunch of designer aligned to do that, and that's the first goal. You know, there's no point into buying new hardware if you cannot design with it or if you cannot do anything with it. So create application, create games, and also we're still standing about the basic. How do we do? And this is something I might want to ask you in terms of when the computer boots, what would you like to see in terms of language possibilities? And you know, would you like to, if there's anything in there that interests you, if it was booting into a language, what language would it be? Would it be a basic with line numbers, basic without line numbers, different other languages, just commands, and then you just figure out what you want? So what do you think? I'll let you talk for a while. Any feedback? Leave?
Well, I'm a fan of basic, but
Do you have your opinion on the whole line number, no line number?
having spent 10 seconds thinking about it, I'm a fan of basic. Which flavor? I don't know. Visual basic? Well,
If you're talking languages, something you're going to have to pay attention to is the character set. I worked on some of the Amiga 314, and we were dealing with just the installation and about 8 languages. And you have to kind of decide on your language character set, just because of the way things are crazy once you leave the Latin-based languages.
did that come through?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the deal with the Foenix is that right now there's you can have access to 4 different character set. You have the C64 version, well, the modified version, I would say. You have the plan was, this one is not made, but the plan to do a 16 line, because the screen is 80 column. So you have the normal, this is what you saw on the screen, this is the 8x8 Commodore version. We were thinking about doing a 16 line version, which would reduce the whole thing to, well, instead of having 50 lines, you would have 30 lines, or no, 25 lines or something, whatever. And the other sets would be a PC compatible set. So you have the full ASCII set. This is what you would have in ROM. And there's possibly a way to actually upgrade it and to change it on the fly. So if an application would want to have a different font set, you could actually change it. So that was the plan. And actually right now you have, for screen-wise, font, in terms of font, let's say you want to design something just doing fonts, you have the character set and you have like a character, you have 1 byte to define the character itself. Sorry. And you have 1 byte to define the color, and you have 4 bit for the font, for the background, and you have 4 bit for the foreground. But those colors can be changed because they're coming out of a lookup table. So you can define every single colors of these 16 colors, either background or foreground, to anything you want within 24 bits. So that's one of the things you can do right now. There was a talk about doing another buffer where you could actually have the different aspect of the character, like, I don't know, the underline, or change the aspect of the character, like, I don't know, the accent, whatever, I don't remember. To put attributes with the character. So this is something that might happen as well. So basic would be fine then.
Could you do a basic where you have the option, you could have line numbers or tags? Like, wasn't there a version of Amiga Basic where you could use line numbers or you didn't have to?
Mm-hmm. Because apparently there's 2 ways to go about this. Without the line numbers, apparently it's easier to make because it's just labels. You just change everything, you put the labels. In terms of programming, it would be a lot easier to implement than with line numbers. But in terms of going line numbers and coming up with something fast, we would have to, I mean, some people thought, okay, we could bring the basic V2 from Commodore 64, but it's very limited. It just works within 64K. There would be a lot of modification, and still, even if Microsoft is probably not going to do like Apple, chase people down about it, it's still copyrighted material. So in the best situation, doing a clean room would be a better idea than just take something else and just run it. So if we're going to do something clean room, might as well do something that might be more efficient by using labels. So that's been the talk about the whole basic thing. But then I wonder, if there was no languages at all, would it, but just commands to do stuff, would it be acceptable as well as a user perspective if you had content already for the computer?
Maybe something like Jiffy Dots?
Well, Jiffy DOS, I mean, you won't need Jiffy DOS at that point because it's whatever Jiffy DOS does, it was going to be there already.
Yeah, but in terms of a DOS wedge, also.
Yeah.
I mean,
something to make disk I/O very efficient.
Yes.
In terms of commanding and navigating.
Yes. Well, right now, the way it works is that on the board you have a chip that is used with the Arduino, which is basically taking care of the whole FAT32 system. And I've decided to use that early on to ease up my job, obviously, because, I just have to send command and I'm going to get all this PC style. So I would have command like load, save, dir, and directory, stuff like that. That would allow me to have access and then execute stuff and make it work, right? So that will become that will be easy to do with that kind of chip. The problem with that specific chip right now is that it's pretty slow. So I'm looking forward to actually migrate the controller into the FPGA and actually do the FAT32 file system into the kernel itself, which will be done a little bit later. But for the development purpose, then we're going to use that chip to allow people to actually work their file. And on the board as well, there's a debugger port, which is a USB port that allows to take control of the machine and dump information directly in the memory and run it for people who wants to design software, games, and stuff like that, which makes the whole development a lot faster. All right, so this is in a nutshell what the computer is about. Where is it now? So the next step for me is to really bring it up to a point where it's acceptable for the designer or the software designer to actually be able to do something, which means to have access to the music part, have access to the graphic part, and maybe with a minimal kernel, not something very, very, very fancy, but good enough to actually get them to download and to run their stuff. And this I'm looking forward to do in finish, obviously, or hopefully things will go very well by January, and start sending out the word about pre-sale of the development system. And this will lead us eventually to a final product, which at that point there will be content for. So whether there will be a plastic enclosure, molded or not molded, because early on I wanted to do like a 3D printed version. I wanted people to use to print out their own thing, but the boards became pretty big, so I don't know if it's feasible again. Do we want like an enclosure with a keyboard or no keyboard like the Mega 65? So all these questions will have to be answered at some point. So at this point, I'm looking for people who are willing to develop stuff for it. If people are interested, then they can go on the website and post their interest, or we can send my information and you can communicate with me about it. So I don't know, is there any question at this point? Yes?
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
I have two questions regarding that SID chip, or whatever
Yes.
you created to emulate the SID chip. I wanted to know, first of all, what is the signal to noise ratio, and what are your issues with hum and things like that? And the second question is, will you be able to use that SID chip to filter and process, also use that SID chip to filter and process samples as well? So we could put ADSRs on samples and things like that.
That's a very, very, very good question. Right now, the plans are to simply, well, the idea is that I'm not a sound person. There's a lot of design out there that implement the SID in FPGAs. I found one, I implemented it, and right now in terms of, I didn't implement on that version of that board. There's still tests to be done to answer your first question. But I would say that my goal, since it's a very powerful audio machine, I need to address the noise and all these. The goal is really not to have any humming or stuff like that. That's really the point, because not only there's the SID, but there's the codec and the other OPLs and everything. So I wouldn't want to have that. So the first question is that yes, we'll do everything to not have that. The second question is, right now, in order to do the filtering, there's no filters right now. So you wouldn't be able to do the sampling with it, because the version I found doesn't have it. You have to do it externally, or you have to have like analog filters outside. So right now it's not there. Okay. It doesn't mean that in the future it could possibly be there. My goal was really to expand on the different voices of the SID, so to put more voices and to put volume control over the SID. That was really my goal and my first goal. And sampling wise, since there's already a codec, there's really not a point for me to actually do that. But I know that the filters integrated in the SID were more than just being able to do filtering. Not filtering, but sampling. You could do a little way. So on the other end, there's a possibility, and this is really very far off, but I was contacted by somebody not so long ago that a guy works in semiconductor, and he has access to a lot of equipment. And we were thinking that we could actually respin the SID, but with an expanded version of the SID, so at that point we might have those filters in, but that would be a revision 2 of the SID, a new version of it. But this is like, don't quote me on that. I'm just saying that maybe eventually that's something that could possibly happen, and we would use that chip in the Foenix. Does it answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Yes?
Where can we buy the Foenix and how much will it cost?
Okay. The buy will be, I want to make a distinction, okay? There's a time where you can have access to it as a developer, like I mentioned. Will happen within the next couple of months, like in probably more in February. This is the developer version, which means that it's very bare bone. There would be no enclosure. My goal in terms of pricing right now, the board costs me about around $150 US to make. Okay, you have to understand that I'm not in that to make money. It's not about that. I really want to recoup my costs and just cover everything so it doesn't cost me anything. So I would probably sell it around 200 something, between 200 and 250. Just like I said, it's not about profit. I'm not interested to do profit with that. And eventually, anyway, I will want somebody to produce it. I don't want to get involved into producing it. Hence the reason why it's going to be open source and people can spin their own version of the board. The only thing that is not open source will be the FPGA because they are ASICs in reality. So they are like custom chips. And I wouldn't want people to change the design the way at any time they want. So if you want to having it early, I would say February, and on the website, on the shop on the website, and the cost would be about 200, 250 Canadian dollars, I would say. Right now, it costs me 150 US dollars to make. But that's a question, actually. Do you think it's within a good price range?
I would pay $300 for it.
You would pay $300 for it?
300 Canadian.
I mean, considering that they sell the Gigatron in $200 or something, or 180 euros, I think it's fair. That's the thing. If you want to start playing with it early, I think this is the best way to go. As far as the user version is, which will take probably way more time. Although I'm still debating about how people would like to have it. Do you want it like in a big fancy box, like plastic box with the keyboard, or you want like a box like I showed you, like a black box, you just find yourself a keyboard, an external keyboard? So there's still a lot of questions to be answered, and also we're trying to find ways to actually cut the costs. So that was another discussion we had with the ASIC person, that maybe we could actually spin the FPGA into ASIC, and then going from, because the bulk of the cost of the board right now are the FPGAs. So they cost me like 50, 60 bucks together. Well, maybe a little bit more actually. So if I could go from $75 to $25, then yeah, you would have the saving. So is it a good answer?
Yes.
Next question?
A lot of nodding heads.
Huh?
A lot of heads nodding.
Yes, okay, good. Any other question at this point?
What kind of,
No?
yeah, what kind of accessories would be, not included, but could be developed for it? Like, in today's-
Can you repeat the question? I missed the beginning of it.
What kind of accessories could be available for it?
Accessories, interesting. You mean expansion and stuff like that?
Like mice or different types of joysticks or whatever. Like with the 64, you only have the up, down, left, right button. Can we get something like additional access for more buttons on a joystick? Different types of mice that be available for it?
What about
Oh, that-
USB?
Okay, well, right now, again, the idea of this was to come up with something that would pass as something that was designed in 1997. That's the reason why there's no, aside of the debug port that will be removed in the user version, there's no USB. Even the SD card is stretching it a lot. But in terms of software, in terms of interface, you have the mouse port, which is a PS2 mouse. So any PS2 mouse you can find will work, or you can find yourself a PS2 to USB port converter and any mice will work. The keyboard is the same way. I know it's kind of paradoxical because at that point, if you buy an adapter USB to PS2, you figure, why didn't you put USB in the first place, right? But the problem is that to interface USB with that kind of processor would have been a lot more problematic than just buying the adapter. That's one reason. And maybe some people want to use their own old PS2 keyboard. For example, I have one here, a good old Hewlett-Packard keyboard, and it's a PS2 keyboard, right? It's pretty recent, but it's still a PS2 keyboard. So that's for the mice or the keyboard part. All right, in terms of joystick, right now the joysticks can support typical Atari joysticks, but it also works where you can have 3-button. Okay, so there was some version of joysticks that they use the analog input X, analog input Y to actually put button there, and you can actually do that. There's also the analog parts that can be used as well. So you can use analog or typical switches. And I'm looking forward to do some small changes to actually use, there's one joystick that uses a little bit of electronics inside to actually have 4 buttons. I think it was an Atari one, but something that was more powerful, like, was it what was the name of the joystick or the console that used those joysticks?
Are you thinking of the Atari Jaguar?
Yes.
And now with the some of the later ST models, they actually had 2 standard DB9 connectors and 2 enhanced joystick ports that would take the additional buttons that the Jaguar.
Yes, because they put like a serial parallel to serial interface.
Exactly.
But in order to do that, you need like a bidirectional port. And right now, the logic to do bidirectional is not there, but I'm planning to do it so we can expand on the kind of joystick we can use to add more buttons. Because I think short of actually putting like a Super Nintendo connector, the best thing I can do right now is just trying to make the joystick port as flexible as possible to have access to all these different joysticks. Because the Super Nintendo is just a different interface altogether. And one other thing is that you still have an expansion connector on the side that will allow any makers to create an interface to anything, to put any mouse or any joystick they want. Okay, so that was also one part of the philosophy, is just to make it as open and as flexible as possible to expand it upon. People bug me about it. Oh, why don't you put like an Ethernet controller on it? Why don't you put this and that? You know what? I think it's important to just leave people design their own stuff and bring their own. So create like this community of different things, different devices. If people think that 4 megs or 2 megs of memory is not enough, you can have an expansion for it, and so that was the idea as well. Anything else?
As far as the case idea is concerned, there are people today that are redoing the original Commodore 64 case.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if you designed the board to maybe work with those and coordinate something with them and have it functional with all the features you want, but within the confines of the original
Mm-hmm.
case that's now being remanufactured, and then just for cost savings.
Yeah. No, I hear you. This is something I thought about at some point. Honestly, I didn't do any. I didn't approach any of these people so far. I was kind of early on in the project. I was very enclosure oriented, and I kind of put that on the side for now because I wanted to focus on electronics first and create this development platform. And usually, development platforms don't have enclosures. We don't bother with this, and I figured I would come back to it later. And when I saw the Mega 65 enclosure and keyboard, I thought, oh, you know what? This could possibly be a good candidate for that. But I didn't approach any of these people, and I was kind of disenchanted with the whole concept when I saw the price they were selling these enclosures, knowing very well that that's not the price they're paying. But since they want to absorb the cost of the mold, they're selling them very expensive. So I was like, do I really want, if I'm going to pay that kind of money to get a mold or to get an enclosure in quantity, might as well create my own mold and to get it manufactured, because these days in China to get a mold is a lot cheaper than it used to be. So to answer your question, yes, it's a possibility. Then maybe I could ask you the question, would you rather have a keyboard integrated into the unit or not? It's something that I would like people to give me feedback about, because I'm kind of on the fence about this.
Well, I mean, in true Commodore fashion, if you're looking at a successor to an 8-bit computer, they all have a keyboard built in. It's only natural to continue that.
I agree with you. But you know how people are these days. They complain, oh, this key is not in the right place. This key is not the right place.
Yeah,
I know, it's very difficult to satisfy everybody.
exactly.
But you know what, you could just put a blank plate in there and have the option there for people to add a keyboard if they want, or you just use it with a separate keyboard, right? Remove the plate.
Because the Mega 65 keyboard was really, really nice. I thought it was really, really cool, and integrate that into an enclosure, either design or not, or is enclosure would be super cool. And I guess he would be open about it. I don't know. We have to see. But yeah, you have a question there?
Yeah, time for one more question.
Okay, no question, just about this keyboard. I just think myself personally, from a service standpoint, it's a lot easier to get a $10 keyboard that I can, if my keyboard goes bad, if I've got my coffee on it, if my bagels are in there, and my pizza and the rest of it, get into that keyboard, I can just whip it and get another USB keyboard to plug in. That's my opinion.
Okay.
Eric had a question.
What about the person in the back there?
Yeah.
What kind of color scheme were you thinking of? Are you thinking of like a 90s style color scheme or something more modern?
Did you say color scheme?
Yeah. 90s style, progression color scheme, or do you want something more modern?
Rainbow.
Rainbow? Actually, somebody posted something on the forum this week about the colors and how the enclosure should be more like a typical bread bin Commodore color. And till that moment, I was like, you know what? Maybe why not? I never thought about that because I always do my stuff in black. And say it. You want to say something there?
I do. The Commodore Plus 4 was cosmetically a beautiful computer.
Okay.
Especially, I think that's the direction it should go.
Which is like a charcoal
With white keys.
white keys. Okay. No, listen. I like darker. I'm not sure if I would go along with the off-white version of the VIC-20 or the bread bin color. Never found it very cool, although I found the gray to be better. But I agree with you. The dark version of the Plus 4 and the C16 were really cool, and I would certainly go towards that. And if you look at the background of the screen, it's also gray.
Yeah.
So yeah, it makes sense. With a white keyboard, yes, it would be actually cool. Very, very cool. Yes, I agree. Anything else? Leave?
Okay, no, we gotta wrap up and get ready for the next part of the show, but thank you very, very much.
Thank you guys for coming. Thanks, Steve, for inviting me. Thank you. All right, I will talk to you soon then. Take care, guys.
Okay, take care.
Bye.